fiends, friends, and familiars. This is Matt Orozco from Macabre Daily here, and I am excited today because I'm joined by filmmaker Chris Vander Kaay, who is you're the jack of all trades for this film, pretty much. You're the writer, director, editor, star of Ask. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here with and spending some time with me.
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, I did all those roles. I am also apparently in charge of the PR, so that is why I'm here.
There is a beauty and a burden that comes with being the kind of sole person in charge of something. So as much as it can be a very liberating experience, it also means all the work ends up falling on you.
Yeah. I think it was John Carpenter who said, "I want all the credit, but I guess I have to take all the blame too."
Yep,
So,
that's and you know what? As long as you're willing to take both, I think that's what makes this separates the good from the not so great. Is the willingness to just fall on the sword every now and then.
for sure.
But Chris, I just want to say again, thanks for taking some time to speak because we reviewed Ask last week on the site, and I hope my review put forward, I enjoyed the film. I definitely thought you had a lot to say that I'm more curious to know more about in regards to online influencer culture and a lot of the kind of online grifts that we find, but also, we're taking a version of the monkey's paw tale that we know so well and then applying it into that modern context.
Yes.
Um,
Well, and I did want to say, I know we're being recorded, so I might be saying this disingenuously for all anyone else knows, but I did want to thank you for that review because you did actually catch a lot of things. I've gotten a lot of positive reviews for the film, but you caught on to a lot of the thematic stuff that was of interest to me to talk about in the movie, in your review. So I was actually very excited when you said you wanted to talk because you touched on some stuff. Like you can just watch the movie, I feel like, on a surface level that's just more about sort of the Twilight Zone vibe of the movie, but you tapped into a lot of the stuff that I felt was the thing that I felt was interesting to have the conversation about to begin with. So thank you for the review, and yeah, I'm absolutely excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I love when listen, I love a good straightforward horror movie, no frills, just kind of lean and efficient, but at the same time, I think what makes discourse around particularly genre films so interesting is that it can be a kind of mechanism or a vehicle for metaphors. And I think because I have such a strong opinion, I think about online influencer culture is why so much of that resonated with me.
Yep.
But I want to go back a little bit to basics here with you because you recently had a show that started on Found TV, which is Found Footage Finds. But I'm curious to kind of know a little about your origin. How did you at what point did you decide I would like to be a filmmaker, and then parlay that into actually making a film?
Well, it was a very long and circuitous route to get to actually making films. I kind of did some things backwards. I didn't know that I was interested in being a filmmaker until probably late high school. I thought I wanted to be an actor. And then what I realized was that the thing that interested me was not the performance necessarily, it was the stuff behind the performance. It was the story that you were telling. And that's when I realized, oh, people write these, people direct these. They're human beings involved in getting the story that ends up on screen, not just the people saying the stuff. And so I got interested in that and many years later, 2000, I want to say 2012 was the first time I sold something, a screenplay. I sold a Western screenplay, ended up being turned into a movie called The Redemption of Henry Myers. It was a fairly big production, particularly for a first-time screenwriter. It ended up becoming a $1 million Western that premiered on the Hallmark Movie Channel
Wow.
in 2014, I want to say, something like that. And then I hit a decade-long dry spell in terms of being able to get work from anybody else. Numerous reasons. The first was I was a horror filmmaker who had a sort of vaguely faith-based Western as my only credit, so that was not hugely helpful to me. But then also I'm interested in things that I think other people are not necessarily interested in spending a lot of money to talk about. So I had a hard time with the projects I was writing getting anywhere. In the interim, I went back to college. I got my degree. I was teaching screenwriting and in English classes, and then I ended up getting poached and leaving the educational field entirely, and I got into marketing. And you can obviously see where my knowledge of the marketing world came
Yep.
into play with what I'm talking about in Ask. A lot of the frustrations I ran into and the charlatans that I butted up against in the marketing arena. I worked in legal marketing when I first started. So you can imagine the number of scam artists wandering around in there looking for, lawyers have deep pockets, so everybody wants a little. And so, I saw a lot of people that reminded me very much of the person I ended up playing in Ask. And so one of the things I knew I wanted to capture was that vibe of everyone who purports to be an expert, but if you were able to peek even a little bit behind the curtain, you would see this sort of thirstiness and desperation to everything that they're doing, and you know, just the constant spinning of the plates to make everything look, you know, they're like super professionals, a thousand things going on, but the truth is they're just figuring it all out just like you are. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily any better. And I thought that was a compelling figure if I could figure out how to show the in front of you know the side of YouTube that we see and then the other stuff that doesn't quite make the cut and show that juxtaposition. I felt like there was something worthwhile to share there.
I mean, I think you're, well, one, you're absolutely right that there was something to share there because, you know, I work in tech, right? I would love to say Macabre Daily is my sole, you know, what source of income, but horror does not pay the bills for most people,
Yep.
and it doesn't for me. So, you know, in my full time, you know, 9 to 5, I see a lot of, you know, tech and tech marketing and how kind of things are spun a certain way and how we often kind of attribute expertise to people who just are simply really good at understanding algorithms, and how to game them. And you know, I think that there's what you touched on and asked, this idea that there is so much being done to put up this facade for people online of how people are and what's really behind that, is so important now because I think we're reaching a point where social media has, I don't want to say it's saturated, it's become saturated, but it has become far more easier to spot disingenuous actors and lack of authenticity, and the online grift culture that's come with it. So I'm curious, you know, you play yourself in the film, right? And so I'm wondering, why was it important for you to cast yourself and kind of break the walls there as opposed to making some entirely fictional character up?
Yeah, well, so there were two primary reasons for that. The first one was entirely pragmatic, which is, I mentioned this to you, but I don't know how frequently I've spoken about this. The budget for this film was basically sub $250 for the making of the entire movie. If anything in the movie looks more expensive than that, it's because it was a thing that was happening in my life in some way, or I was going to be interacting in some way, or be at a place or whatever. And so I just reverse engineered and figured out how to use it in the film since it was going to happen already. So actual outlay of money in my life was $250. And that's even including you know, festival fees for a couple of places. So that gives you an idea. I
Wow.
didn't spend much. But because of that, I was repurposing a lot of things from my real life. And what I realized was the easiest thing for me to do is to just name the character in the movie my name. Because then, no matter where I'm shooting, if somebody that knows me says my name while we're in the shot, it doesn't matter. I didn't ruin a take. Any, you know, if I have any photographs or, you know, identifying elements about me that have my information on it, I can just use it. So there was no, the reason there was no separation between me and the character was really more a pragmatic decision than anything else. But I will say it was helpful to me in making this movie to use my own name because I can't lie, I definitely do have, or had for a very long time, and still to some degree do, have some level of imposter syndrome
Sure.
about the community that I work in, both the film community, because I'm making a $250 movie in an arena where people are making this for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then also in the marketing arena. I'm a guy who, you know, I'm not poor, but I don't make a ton of money, and I'm in rooms with attorneys that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I'm
Right.
supposed to be in there telling them how to do something, right? I'm the expert that they're learning from, even though they're rich, and I had to have my boss pay for the airline ticket to get me here to teach them, you know? So there's this juxtaposition between in my real life between knowing that I'm the expert for something and then also feeling like the odd man out in the room. And so keeping my name and having that imposter syndrome element be a very big part of the story felt honest to my real lived emotional experience, and therefore I felt like was probably easier for me to tap into because I'm also not primarily an actor. So
Mm.
the most, as much as I could keep that was of me or was close to me was going to make my performance all the better, you know?
Yeah. I mean, was it cathartic at all to do that? Because it feels like there is this element of maybe like ex by talking about this in this way, you're almost kind of working through the worst possible scenario. So did you find it any sort of catharsis?
Uh, so it's interesting. I am dubious about the idea of the efficacy of catharsis. Whether in fact it works or not, you know, I love the idea of, you know, being able to work through your demons or get over something by, you know, exposure to it. But what I have found is that the more time you dwell in the space that makes you uncomfortable, the longer you are uncomfortable, and not
Yeah.
necessarily like I don't know. I don't always feel like I get over it. However, what I do feel like is being willing to share that vulnerability and that discomfort does make other people feel like they understand and connect with you more. And
Yeah.
that is something that I have been very surprised to find has been ultimately very connective with this project for audiences, more so than I would have expected. Because it while it has absolutely connected with people who would be considered content creators or influencers or whatever who I've talked to in the horror movie space, also just regular people really relate to a lot of what my character was going through in the movie, the struggles that he kept running into in terms of like feeling like the day that he's gone, his memories and his impact have vanished. And what kind of imprint did he leave on the world? And so while I wouldn't say there was catharsis in the movie, what has happened is there has been a flow of goodwill and I recognize that and sort of connection with other people who I didn't realize were feeling the same thing I was feeling. So there, while I wouldn't say it got it out of my system, it made me feel better to know that I'm not the only one that feels like that, and that maybe
Yeah.
benefits from knowing that we're all sort of on this road together, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is an element. I mean, the research that's been done around vulnerability continues to show that it is kind of very much like an infectious, it's like an epidemic ways when people are exposed being vulnerable, it often gives permission to others around them to do the same. And I think so much of what you do in this film is you do put yourself out there. So, and I would agree with you that it's not catharsis. It maybe isn't the outcome for these kinds of things so much it is you're kind of become more comfortable with the discomfort. And I
Yep.
think we all carry around a level of imposter syndrome because of, regardless of what we do. And whenever we're asked to do something we feel is out of our, above, over our skis or maybe outside of our realm, it's an opportunity for us to maybe prove ourselves, but also it's a really existential threat to like our sense of self.
Yep.
So I think the way you channeled vulnerability in this, and also the way you mentioned how it can be weaponized, I think that that's part that I took away from the idea that there is an element of narcissism that resides on the surface or maybe even slightly below on so much of people that are out there trying to improve the lives of others, but it's about improving their own situation, using the altruism as almost like a disguise.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, in fact, one of the things that I hope someone would take away more than anything about this movie is um, that when you feel like people on the internet are you're connected to them closely in some way, almost without fail, it is because that is a very solid methodology by which they can get something from you.
Yeah.
Um, the internet in many ways is a con game. It's a long con. And interestingly, it doesn't often cost you quote unquote money in the way that it used to, where you scam somebody in order to get $100 from them. Now, what you're trying to scam them for is emotional investment and as much of their time real estate as you can get. So when they can be vulnerable and then you recognize that and you connect with that and so you just want to see them experience whatever and then suddenly you're now watching 6 hours of their content a month. Well, that 6 hours pays their bills,
Right.
if enough people do it. And so it's you pointed it out, I think, in the review, the idea that I don't know, is there another word for vulnerability when it is used with a specific intent and not to just share yourself with someone, you know?
It's like
Um,
manipulation at that point. It's
Oh,
emotional
exactly. Yeah, that's
manipulation.
a fair point. That's probably the better terminology, but like a very specific design of manipulation, you know? And in some ways it is like an old con, you know? They call it a confidence scheme because you're giving them your confidence in exchange for them giving you something else. And that's that is what a lot of the internet is. And so the character that I played, I didn't want him to be just a monster, right? There
Right.
probably are people who are empty vessels who want nothing but to take from others. But I think most people get into this probably with the intent, some good intent, and what ends up happening is that they get pulled by the algorithm or success or whatever it is that they do, slowly get pulled into the direction they end up in, where this is the path of least resistance to get to the thing you wanted, and so you end up doing that. And so you end up in bad places for good reasons. And that was what was important to me to try and express with the character I was playing, which is that he's not a monster. He made some dumb decisions because he was trying to make it in the world, and those dumb decisions compounded, in a supernatural way in his case, but I think in the same way that it happens with a lot of people in life. I mean, how many people have we seen, influencers and reality stars and other people whose lives are ruined
Yeah.
because of the raised profile and what came of it, you know?
Totally. And I think there is, you're right that, I mean, for one, your character, the way you play yourself in this film is very much like, I feel like the average person online, right? who sees success happening in other spaces and thinks to themselves, "Oh, that looks like something I could do." And what we don't get and what we often aren't aware of is that there is so much that goes on behind the scenes for the most successful people on any platform often are not doing it by themselves. They're often not, doing it with no resources. But they put the presentation of DIY and kind of bootstrapping as kind of a way to, again, get other people to think that. And I believe one, you play that character very well. But I'm also wondering, because you've been so exposed to this on kind of the marketing side, and as well as, obviously being now in the horror community, there's plenty of that goes on. Do you see that there's maybe a way forward beyond this? Because you kind of come to a conclusion at the end of Ask about maybe what this could mean, but I think you're smart not to really make a point so much as to kind of lay out what's happened and how the character feels as opposed to how we should feel.
Right. Yeah, and I mean ultimately I feel like with any work of art, and I'm gonna go ahead and boldly say that's what I consider my film to be.
It is. It
Um,
is a work of art, Chris.
Thank
You
you.
own
I
it.
appreciate it. What I will say is I usually feel like the job of a work of art is to start a conversation rather than to conclude it.
Right.
So I don't like to think that I made the movie because I had the answer, but I do think that sometimes actually just bringing up the issue in an interesting way that people hadn't thought about is its own most important task, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not smart enough to know the social and philosophical and economic impact that a generation of people being raised the way we have for the last 25 years, how that's going to change the human animal for the future. I don't know. I don't suspect that it's good in the long run, but I also don't know how you fix it, what you would change, you know, in the same way that I think whenever we see a paradigm, I usually it's a technological paradigm that shifts the sort of the course of human evolution. It's rare that you're fully aware of the impact of it or the import of it while it's happening. It's almost always in retrospect. However, I was interested in trying to be one of the people that pointed out everybody keep paying attention to this because we are going to see something here, you
Yep.
know? So it's less like here's your answer and more like, guys, we're all sitting in the pot. The water's heating up. You know what I mean? Don't be the boiling frog. Please pay attention, you know? Um, and I think some of the best art can do that. Like, I don't think everything has to be confrontational. I don't think everything has to have an answer, but I do think everything has to ask a question or have some sort of a point of view. And so, yeah, for me, I don't know what the road out is other than to say, I do think there have been times where things have, I don't know if you've seen recently, they said that younger generations have started embracing physical media in a way that
Yep.
they hadn't for the previous decade or so. And there's been a huge uptick in that recent, well, huge in terms of
Huge
the
in
way
terms
it
of
was
physical
for, yeah,
media.
never the way it was back in the 90s or anything, but like a much bigger uptick. And when I see that, I think of the idea of, you've heard of the dead internet theory, the idea that
Mhm.
we go onto a site or we go onto a social media platform and we think we see activity, but there's no real human edge behind anything. And I think it's possible. I was worried for the younger generation because of all the things they're exposed to with just YouTube entertainment and now AI content and all that. I think it's possible that there is an innate part of the human machine that craves genuine connection and genuine art and sloppiness and confusion. And when they can't get that in the very clearly digital terraformed material that they've been handed, they have to search somewhere else. One of the reasons I love found footage so much is because it tends to have sloppy, jagged edges and look a little bit not like the polished quality material that everybody else puts out. And I think that might be why I have a pretty big group of support from found footage filmmakers who liked this and who search for films that feel very low budget and feel like they couldn't have come from a studio. So I am given a lot of hope by the idea that just because it's hard to find doesn't mean people aren't still seeking it and will maybe have to seek it harder and more people will seek it as the mainstream or corporate or money backed things become less and less personal and more polished and less human, that I think that there will just be that instinct for people to just look elsewhere. Those things are never
Yeah.
going to go away because they shove them down our throats and we don't have any choice. But I think more people will start to look for the genuine interaction somewhere. And so, whether it means that everything that we love becomes a boutique industry, which will suck, but at least it will still exist, I don't know. But that
Yeah.
does feel more like the reality, which is that it will happen organically as opposed to like, I don't think there's a law we can get the government to pass that will suddenly make the things that are going wrong to be that much better. Like I don't know that
Yeah.
there's a new rule they could pass at YouTube that's suddenly going to mean that, that lonely young men are not going to be sucked into the world of the men's rights organizations or incel communities or things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. My hope is that we can somehow figure out a way to utilize all the stuff we're talking about here with YouTube and all that kind of stuff to also be an option that people can still find that's positive and genuine. Ultimately, I would say that was the dark point of the movie at the end. The reason that Chris couldn't survive is because I don't think his character had that. I
Yeah.
don't think he was genuine enough and strong enough to be able to remove himself from the things he wanted to save himself. He still needed that stuff so much. He needed the validation or the success or the whatever so much that he couldn't sacrifice it. And I hope people would see that as a challenge.
I mean,
Like
that's what makes him sympathetic, to be honest. Like, I think that's, really what reminds you that at the end of the movie, there's a person, right, that this is happening to, is that, you see all these good things happen to this person and, things start to turn the other direction. And the realization, your character comes to is that, maybe I don't matter, right? It's like, and like, I think the point that maybe was supposed to be taken away for the character is that you do matter. It's just that these things that you're putting all of your effort and your energy into are not what define you. What defines you is you. And I do believe that we are seeing a rejection, I think, of some of the tech that's being kind of shoveled down for example, I'll use reading as a good example. Horror lit is having a massive resurgence right now. I mean, horror literature is driving a huge resurgence in people reading again, like physical books.
yeah,
And it's because, I think horror, it gives you something tangible to hold on to. It gives you a story you can take with you. The connections that people build with these authors is far much more personal because they are often independent authors that don't have, massive backings. And so there is this element where you are feeling closer to the person that made this, as opposed to when you rent something on streaming, you don't always feel like you're close to the filmmakers or the actors
yeah,
who made it. You're close to the service that provided it to you.
yeah,
And also, millennials and Gen X are chasing nostalgia because we were all raised in childhoods where our parents told us to hate the things that we should love, and discouraged us to become more like them as opposed to becoming more like who we are. So I think there is an element of like we're rejecting these things that are forcing us into this sense of kind of complacency as a means to maintain the humanity that and the connection that we get from them because
yeah.
found footage is a great example. The community of found footage fans, like found TV exists because of the thriving, it wasn't that there was this is not a nice to have. Like there was a need for people to have a place to go to find new found footage films. And I know you said you love found footage. At what point did you realize that found footage was the genre that you really super keen on?
So that's a good question because I would actually say it extends out further than found footage in the sense that I like what I call in-world camera stories. Any movie that takes place as if it was being recorded by a camera that takes place in the universe. So whether it's a fake documentary like this is Spinal Tap or Punishment Park or Blair Witch Project, I consider those to sort of be, I use the term found footage as a catch-all because it's the one most
Right.
famous phrase. So frankly, as a marketer, I know that you put a certain hashtag on a thing and someone will pay attention to it.
Yep.
But I like all of those. And the reason that I like it is because it's actually the newest genre that's ever been invented. It's the only one that was invented in the 20th century. Every other genre existed within
Yeah.
literature or within the stage play. It's the only one that was ever invented, and by of course by virtue had to have only been invented once film existed. You can't create a fake documentary without a documentary. Now, I mean, obviously, Dracula was a series of fake letters, so like theoretically it kind of exists in literature, but I just mean the experiential sense of watching something that purports to be filmed and recorded actual thing that is created as a fictional narrative. I love it because of how flexible it is and how much you can really do within it. Blair Witch was probably, uh, I mean, it was the first one that I recognized what it was, but I would say I probably saw Man Bites Dog and This Is Spinal Tap before I saw The Blair Witch Project. And I loved both of those movies. And it's crazy that it took me so long to realize that all three of those movies kind of fall under the same heading of type of film. And that's crazy when you think about that. The
Yeah.
the the diversity of just those three titles without getting into anything else. And the diversity of cost within those films as well, how much money they spent on each of those. Um, And so that to me has it felt I've always felt like found footage or fake documentary, whatever you want to call it, is sort of the community theater of filmmaking or the
Mhm.
punk rock of filmmaking in the sense that it doesn't cost as much and you don't have to have as much talent in order to get a final product that you can hand to people to show them your passion, while removing all of those obstacles that stand between you and a completed piece of art. Before community theater, everybody had to pay a lot of money or get sponsored or hope that you could win tickets to get into a Broadway show or whatever before it became sort of democratized. Same thing with punk rock. You had to
Yeah.
have a bunch of money and all the equipment you had to buy and the music lessons you had to learn and voice lessons and to get played on the radio. And then suddenly punk rockers were like, no, I know three chords and I'm really pissed off and we're going to figure out how to record this thing. And if that means we're going to eat nothing but beans for the next month and a half in order to be able to put all of our pennies together and record to make an album, you know. And so that ethos has always seemed to be reflected in found footage as well, which is to say, like, this is the cheap way for you guys to say the thing you really want to say. And that's why it's valuable to me. My friend the other day said, we were texting about something. He goes, I knew I could always count on you to be my theme guy, my themes guy, because that's what I care about. And
Right.
what is a movie about? What is it saying? And the thing I love about found footage is, of course, you're going to get people who are just making a quick cash in. But you don't make much cash in
No.
found footage, unless you're one of the lucky 25 movies that has been really profitable. You're doing it to make something you can put out into the world. And the only reason someone wants to do that is because they feel like they have something worth saying.
Yeah.
Not every found footage movie has a great message, but there is passion behind almost every one of them because there's so few resources that it's got to be passion that's bringing it about. And that to me is really compelling and makes it worth watching sitting through a lot of maybe not great movies to try to support that passion and to try to find the ones that other people haven't discovered and share those with them.
I mean, it's that you raise such a fascinating point to me because I just saw Weapons yesterday, which has been the darling of the internet,
Yep.
and very well made film, entertaining and very, but it also is very pointless. And I don't, and I don't want to spoil anything, but like, when you come to the end of this, the more you think about what has happened in the past 2 hours and 15 minutes, the less you're like, wait a minute, why did any of this happen at all? Like what is the reason for this being the point of this story? And I think that when you have a big studio behind you, you can rely on the aesthetics a lot more. You can say, oh, we're going to put this really aggressive scene at the end. We're going to put these things that people are going to remember, because that will kind of carry the hype a little bit. But when you are working within kind of a very strict budget or you're doing it yourself, you can't rely on aesthetics as much because you probably don't have the budget to do, big graphics or big practical effects. Instead, you have to think about like how do I tell a really good story that's not going to make people think about what I'm missing, what's omitted from this. And I think what you do with Ask is exactly that, is you find a way to tell a story that doesn't rely on anything else except the individual in front of it. Like we don't even meet Ravi, right? Like it's like Ravi's like he's just a guy that we know you're working with. For all intents and purposes, he could be a hallucination. We have no idea. But what we do
Right.
know is that like this is Chris Vander Kaay's story. This is not the story of Chris Vander Kaay and all these people around him. And I think again, hats off to you for being able to keep it focused that way because I think so many of the times it becomes, you know, we want to try and do something like kind of throw a big gimmick in there. I mean, even at the end of the scene, you do something that I feel like you must have done that yourself because it looked like you were really putting pliers where they were going. But it's that kind of thing that just I could feel that watching that, even if it's because it looks real. It probably is real.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I really appreciate you saying that about I'll tell Ravi that you said that you appreciate it as well. Yeah, it was fun to create an entire, basically like the supporting character in the film that no one ever sees, but is really genuinely a presence in some ways because of my character interacting with them. But no, I appreciate what you said about the performance because I mentioned it earlier. I'm not an actor primarily. I took a couple of acting classes in high school and college, but it's not the thing that I decided I wanted to do. I want to be a storyteller of the requirement to have the story told with no money, I decided I was going to be in it. I'm the one actor I knew would show up every day because I didn't have any choice. So it always feels nice to hear that someone thought that the performance was good because I just have to trust that other people feel that way. I have no objective reality when I look at it myself. But to your point about the idea of found footage being found footage to me is There's a movie called The Commitments where they say the Irish are the black of England and Dubliners are the black people of Ireland. The idea being like they're even more trod upon than this other trod upon group. Found footage to me is the horror genre inside of horror, right? Horror is the transgressive genre that people still go to watch, even though it's constantly challenging and uncomfortable to them, that can make a huge amount of money with no stars, that has wild stories that you can't tell anywhere else. And I feel like found footage is an even smaller microcosm of all of those things also being true, even smaller budgets, even more challenging aesthetics, and sometimes even more disturbing content because you can get away with more when you're not spending any money. And that's fascinating to me because it's like horror is the metric that everybody's like we want to put out horror movies from the studio but we don't want to brag about it because it's sort of the
Right.
embarrassing thing we do to make money. Like Paramount put out all the Friday the 13th movies but they didn't want to take a victory lap on that. They just wanted
Yep.
the money and to not talk about it. I feel like that's the way the overall movie industry looks at horror, and I kind of feel like that's sometimes how the horror community looks at found footage. On the other hand, I love found footage. I think it's not just a good and viable kind of horror. I think it's actually a really important arena for watching real-time evolution of filmic storytelling in a way that no other genres are. So it's really important, and there aren't really people doing much in the way of scholarly work in the space. I mean, there are a few people, but it's not in the way that it is in most other film, even in other arenas of horror. And so it was very important to me when I made this movie to try and make a film that I credited the audience with being able to do what you did with the review, which is to say, here's a thing that could be a surface sort of Twilight Zone, creepy, cosmic, horror-y type story, but there's several other things going on underneath the surface. And for anybody who wants to look, you are, I don't want to say rewarded, but you are right in finding the things that you found, and that you should be doing this with everything you watch in the found footage arena. There are other things under the surface going on. Like that's super important to me. And knowing the history of found footage, and then what am I commenting on because of the fact that my movie is building off of the relatively young screen life subgenre and things like that. Like all of that stuff is super important to me. And so when I made the movie, as little money as I had and as, very specific as my talent set allows, I wanted to make room for all of that because in the same way that you have obviously a huge love for the horror genre and particularly independent horror, the site covers so much stuff that doesn't get coverage anywhere else. Like that's kind of my calling as the curator of found footage is to try and
Yeah.
do the same for anybody who's interested in dipping their toe in there.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, it's like I think you're right about the people kind of treating found footage as almost like the patsy for so much of kind of within the horror community itself because and I think part of it is because of how the perception of ease I think that comes with it. And I say perception of ease is because people think, oh, I could just go and make a found footage movie. I've got a phone, I
Yeah.
can go do this, but really like that's not all it takes. In
Yeah.
and
Well,
you
and to your point, I would say though, it's not just the perception of ease, it is actual ease because there are movies out there that are exactly what you just described.
yeah.
They're quick cash-ins that somebody shot over a long weekend in the woods or in a closed mall that don't seem to have much else behind it other than we had a cool location and a camera. So we're not immune to that. That absolutely
Sure.
that does exist. When you lower the threshold for anybody to be able to make something, of course, there's going to be some other somebodies that cash in on it. But to your point, there is the illusion of ease for quality, and that I
Right.
think is the difference. Is it is easier to make a movie. It is much harder to make a good movie like that.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction because you're right. It happens in everything. Like, anyone can go, that anyone can go make a slasher movie if you got a mask and a knife, right?
Yep.
And are you going to make a good slasher movie? That kind of all depends. But
Yep.
there is this element that found footage, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody else. So I'm willing to acknowledge my own biases and saying that like there have been times I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel like this. It doesn't resonate with me because it feels like maybe they're violating the rules of found footage, or maybe it doesn't feel real enough. And we always say at Macabre Daily, like there's never like no one ever tries to make a bad movie. Like I don't think that people go out there and
Right.
really are intentionally saying like let's make this the worst thing ever. But I think that there are forces that happen to things in production. There are things that come up in regards to limitations or challenges that divert a film or just internal just people in the process. But
Yep.
because found footage is it has such a strong following as well. Like there's as many people that are willing to besmirch it, are willing to kind of uphold it and kind of put it as their favorite genre. we see Screen Life as being this evolution of found footage.
Mhm.
Where do you think it goes next from here?
Well, the thing I love about found footage is that new subgenres, or I guess just new explorations into possibilities, continue to pop up so frequently that we don't even always have names for the movements until they've been happening for a while. Like
True.
technically, Screen Life was born in, I think 2001 is when the Collingswood incident was created. I'm sorry, Collingswood story. That was the very first one, and it was literally like barely anybody was using the internet to do video phone calls, and they were already making a movie about it. We didn't get one mainstream ones until Searching and Missing came
Yeah.
out in like 2016, 2014, that ballpark, Unfriended. So we're talking 13 years from the point that the first one came out, and then we got a few other entries and people experimenting with it on small, low budget ways before we ever got to big entries that people saw and then started to call something, you know? And then
Yeah.
you get somebody like Timur Bekmambetov, who really got behind the movement. He was the one that produced Unfriended and Profile and several other well-known ones. But the thing I like about it is that we're talking about Screen Life like it's new. And I mean, 13 years isn't that old. But like, well, no, I'm sorry. Now it's, what is it, 2001? So 24 years old,
24 years,
right?
yeah.
So 24 is actually kind of old, you know what I mean? That genre can drive and drink at this point. But that's a long time for something to have been around that we're only just naming, you know? And then you look at other things like there was a found footage film that was shot on a 360-degree camera, you know? It's hard to show it because how do you display
Yeah.
that somewhere if you don't have a 360 screen? But someone shot it, and there are ways to sort of like interact online where you can play it and you can scroll around and look at stuff in real time. I forget what his name was. The guy that made Spring Breakers, he shot an entire movie on a forward-looking looking
Sean,
infrared.
is it Sean Baker?
No, that wasn't Sean Baker.
Oh,
It's
Spring Breakers. Oh,
Harmony Korine.
yeah, Harmony Korine.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Harmony
yeah.
Korine. Well, the guy who made Spring Breakers, he made a movie that he shot entirely with, I think, is a FLIR camera, right? A forward-looking infrared camera. The whole movie was shot on that. That technically, in some ways, is sort of falls into the in-world camera in that you can't not know that this is being shot by a very specific kind of camera because it has told you the world looks like this because of the thing we photographed it on. You know, it is calling attention to itself. We don't have a name for what the hell that is. You know what I mean? We don't have a name for the kind of avant-garde stuff that is literally just a single shot from a security, like a rotating security camera, four cameras in a warehouse where some sort of crazy ritual is happening, but we don't get to hear it because security cameras don't have sound. You know what I mean? Like there are these really fascinating experimental things happening that would have been considered avant-garde film in the 60s and the 70s, but now it's just weirdos on the internet, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
posting stuff on YouTube. So, but like there's obviously the back room sort of has a foot in both the POV or shot on video camp and also a little bit maybe found footage depending on the entry. So that's a really interesting thing. The analog movement that came about with a lot of YouTube channels lean into the analog movement. So like all of those things are sort of like cousins and neighbors of found footage and in-world camera stuff. And the interesting thing about it is we may not name that for another
Yeah.
7 or 8 years. The back rooms has, if you go on and look up the back rooms right now, you will find thousands of videos online about it, right? Kane Pixels, I think is the name of the guy who created the original short. He's just now starting to shoot the feature film version of it for A24, which means it won't be out until at least 2026, I think, maybe later. We already have thousands of stories in that mythology that exist online that has a codified name, the Backrooms, right? Like that's now a mythology that exists, or Slender Man, like all these things that grew organically from a place that isn't even defined as a subgenre or a style or anything like that. So the cool thing about found footage is that there probably are three genres that already exist that are just so small and experimental and weird and in the corner right now that we won't know for a little while that they'll be codified as whatever Skinamarink is, or you know what I mean? Like so,
Yeah. I mean,
it's I don't know, it's
liminal
interesting
spaces
to me.
movement is a
What's
huge
that?
one, right? The liminal spaces movement, that's
Oh
kind of
yeah,
been born out
yeah.
of,
I
a
mean,
lot of
I'm
the,
literally right now working on a fake documentary project specifically about liminal spaces. That taps into that exactly, which is sort of it also leans a little bit into the shot on video and then the backrooms type stuff. Yeah, and so all of it has this like interesting connective tissue back to found footage, but doesn't have a clear delineation of how it's separate. And in the way that people are so detail oriented when it comes to the music scene. You know what I mean? And everything, every movement has its own name and when it started and all this kind of stuff. It's so categorized and clarified that doesn't really exist in the found footage space because I think both the people outside of it and also the people inside of it unfortunately don't treat it like it deserves that kind of credit and recognition and scholarship, you know?
Yeah.
So like I said, I think that's why Screenlight took so long to come about and why whatever the next one is that we're living in the midst of right now, we're not even aware of until it eventually becomes big enough or someone that we consider to be an industry expert or a scholar or whatever puts a name on it and then we all accept it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and I
So,
guess like in putting in analyst speak, we haven't kind of we're at that, we're at the peak of almost inflated expectations of hype cycles. It's like we're trying to kind of get to this space where we're trying to define something, and we're right. Human beings are by nature looking for connections and category. Like, or we make sense of life by labeling things and kind of trying to relate them to other things that we're aware of.
yeah,
So I think you raise a good point that we're probably already in the midst of whatever is next. We just haven't we don't really understand that yet. And the idea that well, the implications of things like AR, which have been talked about but haven't really taken off,
yep,
if AR, and I think you said something earlier that make kind of ties this point together around technology being a force of progress and enablement, and especially in relation to found footage, is that the more the technology for found footage becomes immersed into our life, like, you know, body cams are a great example. Like I think there have been examples of body cam films out there. I think End of Line is the most famous one that comes to mind, where, the last 20 minutes of that movie is all kind of one body cam.
yeah,
But there is an element of those things that we haven't really labeled or defined yet, but they exist. And they do challenge our perceptions. Harmony, I know the movie you're talking about, Harmony Korine. I didn't. It was at Fantastic Fest last year, and I didn't go and see it. I had a scheduling conflict, but I heard a lot of people say, like any Harmony Korine film, lots of different things about it.
yeah,
Some people thought it praised it. Some people were like, "What was that?" But I think that's sometimes the point, is that
yeah.
person that's their art.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, its existence and its experience it's already done its job. Like beyond that, the judgment of its quality is not even an interest for Harmony Korine, I don't think at this
Right.
point. But yeah, and also something we touched on a little bit, I think we skirted around, which is the idea of the found footage or fake documentary or whatever as an aesthetic, as opposed to nobody's fooled anymore that a found footage film
Right.
is real, right? We did it with the Blair Witch Project and it was incredibly effective. Thumbs up to the marketing team on that. Fool me once, you know what I mean? Shame on you.
Yeah.
It really won't happen again, at least not within the format as it exists. And so one of the things that I find, and I suggest to people who watch found footage movies, when they say things like, "Oh, this really took me out of the reality of the film," I always say, you know that the film is not real. You know that going in. All of these are not real. So try to just consider, is the movie being made the way it's being made aesthetically for two reasons. One is because it works effectively, right? It's they call it Batesian mimicry. It's looking like something else that's not safe, and so that's why it scares you because it appears to be something that it isn't. Or second, they don't have the money to make it look another way, and that's why it looks this way. It's not,
Yeah.
they're not trying to fool you. They're trying to work within the confines of what they have or utilize an aesthetic to create an impression. And so when I thought of that, I stopped looking at found footage films in terms of did they do a good job of making it seem real to me, and more, did they do a good job of using the aesthetics that were at their disposal to tell the story they were trying to tell? And if they did, then I don't get mad. Like there was a really cool movie called um I think it was something Arletta Avenue. Was it 388 Arletta Avenue is a found footage film. It has the kid from the third Terminator movie whose name I can never remember, Nick Stahl. And it's a film about a guy and his girlfriend who are being stalked by someone who's watching them on hidden cameras. Now, this movie is entirely shot on hidden cameras that they don't know about in their house, car, work, stuff like that. It is literally impossible for someone to have been able to put cameras in all of the places that the cameras were hidden in this movie. I know that. Realistically, I know that. But he chose it aesthetically as the design of the film because it taps into the fear he wanted to show us and the story he wanted to tell. I'm not mad at him because I don't think that there's a serial killer that could afford to hide 250 cameras all over this guy's life without him knowing. I appreciated that he chose an aesthetic style that let him tell the story he wanted to in the confines of the budget that he had, and I thought it was effectively used. And so that to me might be the next evolution of the genre, just in terms of, and that's more an audience evolution than it is the
Yeah.
filmmaker evolution, which is us catching up to. what can make the movies powerful without us also holding preconceived notions about them. Because honestly, found footage was, I believe, created to kind of break down the confines of traditional narrative film that we were kind of tired of, right? So are we just doing the same thing to found footage that we did to traditional movies, which is why we went to make found footage, you know? So,
You're right about the Audited thing because now that I'm thinking about it, horror didn't used to horror. Let me put it. Let me say this differently. Horror movies were not known for having a point. Like having
mhm.
strong themes in them and even though they have been there, right? They're all over Rosemary's Baby, they're all over The
Yep.
Exorcist, they're all over Peeping Tom. Like it's in there, but we've never recognized it as such because the focus was so much on this is a horror movie, and then in the past 25 years, what we've seen is that horror has been taken far more seriously and has been treated as a way to talk about more sensitive things, like trauma and grief, and all the, particularly mental health and kind of culture as we live it. And I think in some ways, found footage, once the audience has come to terms with the fact that it's a format, and that as long as you are one entertained and kind of one you are engaged with what you're watching, then how that comes together is less important. I think one example I think of that's almost counter to the one you gave is like the Paranormal Activity Next of Kin. It's a
Mhm.
found footage movie, but there's so much in it that is like, well, wait a minute, like why are we switching from this camera to this camera now, right? Like
Yeah.
why that doesn't necessarily make sense. But I think there are, again, am I entertained? Absolutely. Like so
Yeah.
I think sometimes it is the audience that's kind of letting go of their own preconceptions about
100%.
what they're supposed to see and what is. You're right. Nothing. I mean, the Strange Harvest is the only movie in recent years I could think of that if you really weren't following anything online and never heard of it, and you kind of were scrolling through and watching it, you caught it accidentally on TV, you might think that that's real until you get
Right.
to the end of the movie. And you're like, well, this does a very good job of selling its vision, but that's such to be such a small fraction of the viewership that think
Yeah.
that, as opposed to the many who are going to look at it as like, oh, I
Right.
either I either buy it into or I don't. But the real
Yeah.
question is, are you having a good time?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and so here's the thing. This is one of the things I say this might blow your mind, or you might be like, oh yeah, that's the most obvious thing in the world. But within the found footage community, one of the things I hear people complain about all the time is they're like, why was there music in this found footage film? Right? Okay, I understand. It takes you out. That's fine. Say that it takes you out, but I want you to think about something. How are you seeing this film? This film was found somewhere, right? It was shown to you. It means that someone put it together, did they not?
right.
You didn't dig it out of the yard and play it on your VHS player. You found it because someone brought it to you, which means someone assembled it, which means whoever that is that you've already believed has put this footage together for you decided to put music in it because it was more suspenseful, right?
Yep.
Like that's all the explanation you needed to give yourself in order to be able to believe that that thing happened. But you didn't for some reason because you had some self-imposed rules, guidelines that you put on what this genre needs to be in order for it to be effective to you, right? And I'm not saying you can't have that opinion. Please do. If the music is what bothers you, then I'm totally on board with you. Just don't fool yourself into thinking that it's because you are correct and you are the purist who knows what the genre needs and deserves. I'm not a big fan of the gatekeeping kind of stuff like that, right?
Right.
Like I'm a very big tent guy when it comes to these kinds of movies. And for that reason, my whole thing is like there can be a reason for most of the things that you're frustrated about to be true within, I mean, barring, some absolute absurdities of, like literal human logic, if it's not a cosmic story and things are happening where dude's shirt is changing between scenes because they did, poor, the same kind of things you would notice in a terrible regular narrative film,
Yeah.
continuity and whatnot. Those things are hangups that we bring to the table because we have told this movie that we want it to convince us it's real. But we don't hold other movies to that standard. Why are we doing it to this one? When it's doing 98% of the work right, but then it does this one thing, are you really ready to like put it out on the stoop? You know what I mean?
Totally.
I'm not. I'm not telling you you have to. I'm just saying, just take that under consideration. Think about how little money that people are working with and what tools they have at their disposal. And given that, rethink. Does it seem like something that's worth bad mouthing or kicking out or saying this is a waste of an hour and a half of my life? Or is it worth maybe just not commenting on because it wasn't your thing, but it might be somebody else's? And
You
I
know
only
that
say that in found footage, not because I've gotten that reaction. I've gotten almost, I won't say universally positive. There's been a good number of people who didn't connect with the movie, But I have watched other people suffer from this. Independent filmmakers who are just trying to get a very small film into the awareness of other people, and the casual cruelty with which people dismiss movies for very simple things that don't seem like they merit the the unnuanced take that we all have on the internet, which feeds back
Right.
into the whole point of this movie. You know what I mean? That you get lost on the internet for being a reasonable person saying normal things.
And it's funny because the same person that would criticize a film for taking them out with music would be the same person that might ask for it in another film that's similar, right? It's like, that same person might watch August Underground and say, "Oh, that felt too real." Like
Yeah,
why was there, why was and like the whole point of, Fred Vogel's whole point making August Underground was to make it feel like a VHS tip you found somewhere, and that's part of the experience as opposed to,
yeah,
other found footage films. That's not, we're living in a space now where we're not receiving things as a primary physically. So the idea that you're right, like someone, and you did blow my mind with that comment because I think it is something that I don't, I personally could admit to my own kind of lack of awareness on is like, I don't always think about, I think I'm willing to I give passes on things more than I kind of hold against them. But I also didn't think about it in terms of, well, yeah, actually, yeah, I am bringing my own expectations to this. And often our own expectations are flawed, they're unreliable, and they're often malformed. Like, it's like we go into things with these high expectations, but they're almost impossible to meet most of the time because we don't really know what we're looking for. We know what we like when we
yeah,
see it, but to
yeah.
define that ahead of time is almost impossible.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
one of the things that completely changed the way I watch film and television was I was not a huge David Lynch fan, and then I watched Twin Peaks: The Return, and it completely blew my mind. I thought it was fantastic. But what I realized, what that changed about the way that I watch a thing now is when I watch something and I have a response to it that I wouldn't consider positive, my assumption is not that the movie is wrong. My assumption is that I probably need to watch it again because I don't understand what it was doing. Why did I not get what did I miss about its wavelength, right?
yeah,
When you look at art, and I just consider anything that I'm watching within the film arena to be art. If I'm watching a piece of art, I assume they had something that they were trying to tell me. If I didn't get that, it might not be their fault. It
right.
might, or at least not, might not be totally their fault. Some of that might be on me. I know that we think of it's weird because art and entertainment are sometimes interchangeable in terminology when we talk about movies, but entertainment is something you don't really participate in or do much. It's a
Yeah.
thing that keeps you from focusing on the shittiness of your regular life by distracting you. Art challenges you in some way. And so I've tried to think of everything that I look at in terms of it might be entertaining, but I want to treat it as art. And if I do that, then I can't be mad at it if I didn't get something from it because it means I might have missed something. So like
Yeah.
own that a little bit and lean into it. I think the best horror movies are usually ones that like you probably the movies that you love the best are horror films. Some of them are going to be comfort movies, but some of them are movies that probably disturbed you greatly or made you question or made you sort of push back a little bit. And the thing I love about horror film fans is because they want to embrace feeling that level of pushback and discomfort. They want to own it. I feel like probably horror fans are existentially more sound mentally than other people are because
Yeah.
they're willing to sort of take a peek at that uncomfortable stuff. And I just think if you're already willing to do that with the story itself, then be willing to do that about yourself and your interaction with it as well.
I mean, such a salient point now because we all kind of have, everyone has this. Well, there's not everyone. There's a lot of main character syndrome, and people kind of see, presuming that they know better than other people, right? And as such, people should listen to them for that. And I think there's an element to it being to acknowledge your own awareness of your preferences, right? So, I can watch a film and be like, hey, I didn't like this, but I didn't like it because it's a bad film. I didn't like it because it's not for me. It's a film that it doesn't resonate with me. It might resonate with somebody else, and that doesn't mean that either one of us is objectively right or wrong.
Right.
It's the same reason why people get upset, grown people getting upset about companies remaking old cartoon movies. It's like, well, this isn't for you. This is for you
Hmm.
had what was for you, and,
Yeah.
and you always have that. But now this is for something else. Whether that's successful or not, whether that's authentic or not, that's a totally different question. But I
Yeah.
think we sometimes assume that we are entitled to these things
Yeah.
because we love them and because we somehow feel like we have an ownership. And this happens a lot in fandom communities, like, it happen anywhere that there's a strong sense of community with fandom, like punk rock, in like horror, sci-fi, there's always gonna be that sense of potential gatekeeping, but it really is most people just, not being so rigid in their view of what they believe is quality, as
Yeah.
opposed to being self-aware of. And it's funny you mentioned Lynch too, because a friend of mine just said to me, he asked me, should I watch Eraserhead? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, should you?
Yeah.
He's like, well, I'm not. I find that David Lynch films, I can't have to watch them multiple times, and the first time isn't always a great viewing. I'm like, yeah, I mean, for one, like, I think that's most people watching David Lynch movies. I
Yeah.
think that most people
Yeah.
watch
You
them.
have described humanity, my friend.
Yeah, like you're not weird for not getting it. Because he was operating on a very distinct and kind of his own wavelength. But at the same time, you know, to say like, should I watch something because I don't like this other thing? It's like, okay, maybe if you have a history of not liking something so much, maybe there's something about maybe the ambiguity in a Lynch film bothers you. If that bothers you, then yeah, you probably are not going to get anything out of Eraserhead. But
Yeah.
if you didn't like it because it took you a couple times to get it, well, then you probably actually do like Lynch. You just need to
Mm.
get out of your own way and saying it, like, I know that when I watch one of his films, I'm probably going to need to sit with it a little bit, come
Yeah.
back to it. And I had that experience with Mulholland Drive when I was alive and aware enough to know when it was winning all the Academy Awards, and I didn't get it at that point.
Mhm.
But I was 13 years old, like 12 years old, something like that. Like, I wasn't supposed to get it. That wasn't for me.
Yeah.
As I'm older, I still don't fully get it, but I
Right.
can appreciate things about it that before I kind of discarded as being,
Yeah.
bad.
Well, and you touched on something which I tried to explore a little bit in Ask, and especially in some of the new projects that I'm working on, which is the idea of interrogating something that has caused you discomfort or has caused dislike, right? If you don't like a movie, like you said, well, if you haven't liked five of David Lynch's movies, is it that you don't like David Lynch, or is it that you should keep trying to figure out what it is about David Lynch that is not sitting well with you? Because if there's something like if you can't put a term to it, right? Like it's not just like, oh, these are boring and I fell asleep on all five of them, right? If it's not that simple, it means there's something else going on inside that's triggering the dislike, right? And that could be instructive to you as a
Yeah.
human being, as an artist, as a critic, whatever it is, that's instructive. That's what happened to me with Twin Peaks. Not that we somehow wandered into this, but like Twin Peaks: The Return taught me about what the tyranny of story. I used to be like a story guy. I was like the guy that was like, this scene wasn't even necessary for this movie. Like it didn't affect the plot in any way. What's it doing here? You didn't need it. And then I watched Twin Peaks: The Return, and I was like, this is an entire season of scenes that didn't need to be here, but all of it added up to something really emotionally important to me. And so what that helped me to learn was sometimes the experience is more important than the beats of a story that you can tell someone transpired in the thing you experienced, right? And that was kind of what I tried to capture in the final, I would say 15 minutes of Ask was I did give some answers, but what I tried to do more than anything else in that final act of Ask was to make the audience feel suddenly completely distanced from my character in a way they hadn't been for the rest of the film, right? The only time I'm in security camera, the camera is very far away from me. It's in black and white. There are scenes where you don't have any sound for long periods of time. All of those were intentional decisions to intentionally antagonize a little bit the audience that has had a close relationship with my character. And the reason that I did it is because I wanted to challenge someone's expectation of what I had promised them so that they could understand, well, what does that make me feel now? Why do I
Right.
feel differently about this piece, even though it's about the same guy, just because he did it slightly differently than he did the other piece? And so, for me, being challenged by something makes you a better person and a better watcher of material and consumer of art than not liking a thing and then being done with it at that point. The second that
Yeah.
you've decided you didn't like it, it's over. Your interaction with it is completed. Like that's not the end of the road for me.
Yeah.
I will sometimes go back to movies that I don't like at all with the intent of like, I'm going to crack this one. I'm going to figure out what this is. You know what I mean?
I mean, that was me with It Follows. I mean, I've watched it 5 times and
Hmm.
it's just not for me. I know that. I know why it's not for me, but I went back to it multiple times because of wanting to understand what it is about this that I'm not getting. And not
Yep.
because it's bad or good, because I can acknowledge that I'm very entertained by so much of it. But the things that get in my own understanding of it are what hold me back from kind of
Yeah.
putting it in the same echelon as I put other movies. But that said, I'll talk about movies that I put on a pedestal, and people are like, "What are you talking about? That's complete garbage."
Yeah.
And I think it's because what we bring to it, again, is kind of what it means to us doesn't really matter to everybody else.
Right.
It's.
Well, so much of it is autobiographical, right? Like you were talking about Weapons earlier, and I loved Weapons, and there was actually a thing in that movie that really spoke to me very strongly thematically that I won't get into because there's spoilers, but also because you've seen the movie, you
Yeah.
probably know what it is. But what's interesting to me is that I think I'm probably a little bit older than you, and there have been some things that have been going on in my life recently, some health related issues that some friends and family have been going through, and as a result of that a certain aspect of the story of Weapons hit me really, really deeply, right?
Mm.
It is probably not one that most other people clocked, but knowing what I know about Zach Kreger and a tragedy that happened in his life very recently, and feeling like there is no way in hell that that was not informative of this element of the story because I'm feeling it because I had a similar situation I didn't even know about when I went in to watch it. Like, so much of our experience of film is not just autobiographical to the person that made it, but it's autobiographical to the person that's sitting in front of it at the moment that they're
Totally.
sitting there, you know? So revisiting a movie is never a bad idea for me, except unless, you've watched the same movie 60 times and you're not giving any room for anything else, any other experiences. But revisiting is great to me because it allows you to make sure, did I look at this when I'm looking at this with a 45-year-old brain instead of a 25-year-old brain, as the experience of a grown adult with a spouse as opposed to a single guy that's 18. Those are different human experiences and they're seeing a different thing on screen.
Yeah.
And that for me, that's why I can never like anytime somebody says, should I watch whatever, I can't remember the last time I said no. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I can't remember the last time I would have told someone not to watch a thing because there are just tons of movies that I love that nobody else cares about and tons of movies that everybody loves. I cannot do it. I've tried so many times to watch certain things and I can't make it happen. I haven't gotten past the middle of the third season of The Sopranos. I understand that it's good, guys. I'm not saying it's not. It's not my thing, but I'm going to keep trying. And in 5 more years, I'm going to give it another shot. And maybe I will understand Tony at that point in a way that I don't now. But like, yeah, that's my encouragement. And that's also the way that I would say, like, have that energy to turn this back into found footage. Have that energy for found footage too. Like, can you meet it on the ground as close as you can to what you believe the intent of the person was in making it, as opposed to
Yeah.
like we were talking about earlier, does it fit the list of the six things I got to check off in order for it to have applied properly? Can you say, am I understanding what the movie wanted to say or what the filmmaker wanted to say, and then do I think that they achieved that? For me,
And
that's
I,
a interesting way of interacting with something.
Yeah, and I mean, I almost wonder if to some extent, those of us that were kind of at a certain age when the Blair Witch Project came out, it might have ruined some of our beliefs of what found footage could be. Because I mean, I want to say, I don't, somewhere between 10 and 13 when Blair Witch came out. And I remember going to see it in a theater, because I happened to be, my grandparents were in San Diego. I was staying with them for a few weeks. There was a small little arts theater that, was playing it before it went full theatrical. It was kind of doing those runs, like really small art house theaters. There was a massive line to see this thing, and I already knew about it because I was reading. I was a Fangoria reader at the time. This was pre-internet, kind of being ubiquitous as it is. And so I was like, I'm gonna go see this movie, and it scared the living shit out of me because I didn't know if it was real or not.
Yep.
That's because that point in time we had no way of checking it. There was no way of,
Yeah.
challenging this notion. And to some extent, I think that almost sets this really high bar of quality of like
Yep.
very few movies are ever going to make you feel that way again because of the periodic context of which they existed.
Yep.
Just like The Exorcist is not scary probably to younger people or to people younger generations these days as it was to like my mom and baby boomers because they'd never seen a girl, do that with a crucifix before,
Yeah. Yep.
So I think there is so much of that, that we do need to kind of get over ourselves to start until because we can enjoy more. And as you said, so when someone asks should I watch something or not, I think the only response I'd give is like the worst thing you're going to lose is the amount of time you spent watching it.
Yeah.
Like that in the worst case scenario, you're going to walk away feeling like you've wasted a little bit of time. And if that time is that valuable to you, then hey, you're probably not as much of a movie fan because movie fans will
Yeah.
watch anything
Yep.
just the experience.
Yeah.
But
Not to mention, if you don't watch this, you're going to spend 40 minutes scrolling through a platform trying to
right.
find something anyway. Is that more valuable? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're just gonna be clicking through and probably watching something you've seen before because it's
Yep.
comfortable and easy, and the anxiety of choice creeps up on you after about 15, 20 minutes. I don't know about you, but I start to physically get uncomfortable when I
Hmm.
am trying to decide. That's why think physical media makes it a little bit easier to have a finite view of what's in front of you.
Yep.
But whereas Netflix, could perpetually scroll until you
Yeah. You will
find
never
the
get to
thing.
the bottom. You will never get
Yeah.
to the bottom of the list. Yeah.
Well, Chris, I know I've kept you for much longer than our scheduled time, but I just want to first say thank you for what has been one of my favorite conversations this year so far, because I just think we've been able to talk about film in a way that, I hope that folks listening to this will kind of think, oh, wow, maybe that's a little bit of me, or maybe that's something I could change about how I'm viewing this. And you've certainly challenged me to change my views of some found footage films. So now I'm going to be diving even further into this genre head first. But is there anything else you've got coming up that you'd love to share, or are you able to share with folks?
Yeah, well, so I can tell you that I just recently shot some footage for a film with another found footage filmmaker. This is actually, I'm very excited because it's the first time I've ever acted in a thing where I was not making it myself. So I'm actually just an actor in this, so it's
Congrats.
kind of fun. But the director's name is Brendan Rudnicki. He's made, I want to say like 10 found footage films at this point. It's a lot. He's made more than 10 films, but I think he's made like 10 found footage films, something like that. He's made an absurd number of movies. And I didn't know that he lived like a half an hour away from me.
Ha,
He happened to see my movie and he was looking at the locations and he's like, "Oh my God, you're in Orlando." So we started talking and he was like, "Hey, I'm doing this new movie. Do you want to?" So yeah, so I drove over there, shot for a couple days. It was an absolute blast. I can't say the name of the film yet, not because it's a secret. It's because I don't know it yet. I don't think it has a finalized title. But yeah, we shot. It's going to be more mockumentary style. So like, not it's not a comedy, but I mean, it's more structured like a Talking Heads retrospective documentary with footage, sort of like a horror in the high desert or Savage Land type thing, where it's a lot of talking heads and then some archival footage. But it was a lot of fun, and I hope to be able to announce very soon what the title is and to share some behind the scenes stuff. So that's the next thing that I'm working on, and then I have a very secret project I'm not telling anybody about. I have this thing. I'm trying this new thing where I will tell one person in my life about a project until it's done. This is the only person I get to talk to about it. So you're not the one for this project, but
that's
I'll let you
fair.
know if I'm looking for. But yeah, so I've been talking to a friend about, and I'm putting this together. It won't take long to shoot, but then once it's finished, I'm very excited to announce it because it's a very strange sort of experimental type thing within the found footage space. I've not really seen something like this. I don't want to like oversell it. It is still a very low budget project, but it's just interesting. It's surprising to me that somebody hasn't done a thing like this before. So I'm going to give it a try. But yeah, so those are the two things I'm working on now. And then, as I've mentioned before, I am working on a sequel to Ask. It is slow going. It takes a while, much like the first Ask. I'm waiting for things to happen in real life that I'm able to use for the sequel film, and those things are happening slowly but surely. So I just have to grab them all, and then I can fill in all the content in between those pieces that I'm waiting for. So
Outstanding. Well, I'm always happy to be to help spread the message once the time is right for the new for announcements. So please feel free to send it our way. We're happy to, send it across our corners of the internet as best as we can. And reminding folks that you can rent and buy Ask today. You can do it through Amazon Prime. I believe the other site is POV Horror. So we'll put the
oh,
links
it's on Tubi as well. I just want to
on
mention for
Tubi.
anybody who loves
Okay.
Tubi,
Yeah,
Tubi's got a
well,
long and illustrious list of found footage films, and Ask is now one of them. So
Tubi is the genre film fan's best
yeah.
friend because it's got everything and anything. It's got all spectrums of quality, all spectrums of genre, and I think it's fun to just do a little Tubi roulette. So we'll put links to where folks can rent it and watch it, and across the different platforms. But Chris, again, I just want to thank you once more for spending some time and chatting with me. It's been a wonderful discussion, and looking forward to hoping speaking again.
Yeah, no, it has been an absolute blast, and I will just tell you, you can leave this in or not, it's up to you. But um, I will tell you, I will talk to anybody who asks me to talk about the movies because they're my passion, because I want to get them out in the world. But I would be lying if I told you that every conversation that I had was illuminating and powerful and helped me to see something differently or informed my art in some way. This conversation absolutely was that, and so I appreciate not only the conversation today, but knowing that someone who feels and looks at the world and art the way that you do is out there doing this for other people's movies as well. Because it meant a lot to me. But having spoken to you and seeing the lens through which you look at things, it makes me happy to know that you are also doing this for other people with small movies out there that are trying to get them seen. So thank you for what you do as well.
Oh, well, you're gonna make me blush over here. But thank you, Chris. That means a lot because I think sometimes it feels like we are voices in the crowd as opposed to anything else. But I do think that, the best part of working with independent filmmakers is always that there is a good sense of reciprocity, and that it is feel like more of a relationship as opposed to a transaction. We'll continue to be supportive of whatever you're working on and things that are in your atmosphere. And of course, we'll continue to keep pushing folks to Found TV and your found footage finds, because I think that's a place for anyone that's just looking to get started, with and just isn't doesn't know what they don't know yet. The
Yeah.
best place to begin is with something like what you're doing out there to try and bring some awareness, but also academia and kind of and thought to a subgenre that is still waiting for that kind of bigger assessment at the cultural level. So it's
Thank you
been a
very much. I
pleasure,
appreciate
Chris.
that. Appreciate it.